Rebecca, Professor Smith-Bindman, what are the challenges of variation in dose?
In general, you want what you're doing to be as consistent as possible. That generally means a high standard if everyone does the same thing. And what we have found is that there's tremendous variation in how we image patients using CT, and specifically the doses that we use. So while one patient might get a very low or appropriate dose, another patient might get a dose that's 10 or 100-fold higher for the same clinical question on the same scanner, and that reflects poor quality. And so our goal in this broader project is to both lower doses to make them more appropriate, more optimized, but also to bring down the variation, to create standards so that if a patient gets imaged for the same clinical question at different institutions, they would end up getting the same kind of procedure, the same dose, and that would be improvement in quality by reduction in variation.
Let us have details about your study.
So the study was in a broader randomized controlled trial. So that means we invited institutions. We had 100 institutions from 6 countries that participated in our trial. Within the context of our trial, we gave, in order, organizations first a detailed audit of how they were doing in doses, and then followed by a multi-component intervention where we gave them feedback, we told them how they were doing, we made targeted suggestions for how they could do a better job compared to the best performing sites, we educated them on how to do quality improvement, and then the most important part is we had sharing of best practices, so different institutions could learn from each other. That was the context of the trial, and then we followed organizations and saw what happened to their doses. So we looked at what happened to doses after the audit, after the multi-component intervention, and we looked at what happened to the average doses, to the high doses. These were patients who got doses higher than they needed, and third, looked at their variation in dose. And we looked at those 3 things after the 2 components. And what we learned were twofold. First, we saw that average doses came down and that high doses came down considerably. The doses came down as much as 60%, depending on which anatomic area we looked at. And then importantly, we saw that the variation in dose came down substantially, meaning within institution and between institution variation was reduced. Again, it varied by anatomic area and varied by what measure we use, but as an example, for chest and abdomen CT, that's a kind of CT that delivers the highest dose, the variation was reduced 38% after the multi-component intervention.
So what are you going to be doing next? For example, in the context of ALERA and CMS pay for quality initiatives?
So what we're trying to do is to make what we've learned in this trial as widely available as possible. Meaning, to participate in our trial, organizations had to join our dose registry, they had to share their dose information, and they had agreed to get feedback and to look at their doses. It wasn't a large commitment, but they had to commit to working on it. We're now trying, within the context of several studies, as well as a project we're developing for CMS, to expand the availability of what we've offered to any organization that wants to participate. So if organizations want to share their data with us, we will in turn give them feedback on how they're doing. If organizations are not comfortable sharing their data, which we completely understand, we're making free versions of our software available so they can download the software and look at their own data in comparison to the data that we share in this platform. And then they can sort of see how they're doing and where there are opportunities to improve. It's also a good way for organizations to see how their doses within specific categories, for example, imaging for kidney stones or imaging for abdominal pain, imaging for bleed, how their doses within specific narrow categories compare with the benchmarks we create, as well as compare with their own doses over time to assess for improvement. Within the project we're developing for CMS, we're not there yet, but we're developing both a measure of dose as well as a measure of quality. Basically, are the images considered sufficient for diagnosis by the radiologist? That can be a balancing measure that organizations can use when they want to understand, are they pushing their doses too low? Currently, I don't think that's a problem. I think we have a long way to go before doses are too low, but at some point, we want the doses to be the right dose, not the lowest doses. So we're trying to balance that. I would add one more piece of information, which is the organizations lowered their doses within the context of our trial and lowered the variation by just looking at their data more closely. And so we provided the opportunity for them to do that, but it really was incumbent on the institution to make the changes and to make the decisions. So it was the technologist, it was the radiologist, it was the medical physicist, in some cases it was the administrators who took the data we provided and then made decisions on how to optimize. So we're indebted to all those providers who really contributed hard work at their own institution and contributed to our larger educational group to share what they were doing to lead to such large differences and improvements.
So would you be speaking only to U.S. institutions or to a larger international audience?
My hope is to make the tools we available as large and as readily available to everyone. So our trial actually had data from 6 countries. So we've already started to expand, but I think our work could be incredibly helpful. For example, in Europe, as part of the EuroSafe initiative, it's difficult to collect data manually. And our approach is an electronic data collection tool, pulling data that's already available in CT exams as part of the DICOM header. And you can basically assess your doses in a systematic fashion as opposed to a sampled fashion. You can look at all your studies rather than a small number. And the data are all adjusted for patient characteristics like patient size, which often makes it challenging to know what doses are because you don't know if it was a big patient or a small patient, was the dose good or bad. Our measure adjusts for the patient size so you know precisely if the dose was in the normal range after accounting for factors that have been associated with dose like patient size.